This story is titled, My Wife Left for Vacation with Friends and Her Lawyer Started Divorce Proceedings, so I blocked all her accounts and put her stuff on the street. Now they're both standing at my doorstep begging for forgiveness. Sup Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 29 years old. I was born and raised just outside Cleveland, Ohio, and I work as a commercial electrician. I'm not the desk jockey type either. We handle big custom homes and office buildings, and I'm on site most days managing crews, coordinating supplies, and handling inspections. You name it, I do it. But none of it involves sitting behind a desk all day. The work is hot, loud, and demanding. The hours are long and the conditions can be brutal, but it pays well and I'm damn good at what I do. I've built my entire life with calloused hands and stubborn determination. Through years of 16-hour shifts and weekend overtime, I managed to pay off my house completely and got my truck titled in my name alone. No debt hanging over my head, no financial drama keeping me up at night. My wife Victoria is 27 years old, and she used to call me her rock. She described me as stable, dependable, and solid, and she said those things like they were genuine compliments. It seemed like she actually wanted a man who could keep the lights on and wouldn't flake out when things got tough. We first met when we were both fresh out of school. She was working as a third-grade teacher and had this incredible spark about her, while I was just a guy grinding through those brutal 16-hour shifts, trying to build something meaningful with my life. We made it work for 7 years together, with 4 of those years as a married couple. I genuinely thought we were in sync, that we understood each other and wanted the same things out of life. Looking back now, I realize how wrong I was about what was really going on in her head. Then came her 27th birthday, and everything started to unravel. The breakdown didn't happen overnight, but it was like watching someone flip a switch in slow motion. She spent that entire week crying over everything and nothing, constantly doom-scrolling through Instagram accounts of women who claimed they were finding themselves in places like Bali or Costa Rica. Her feed became heavy with content about candles, crystals, and healing the inner goddess. All that spiritual wellness talk that seemed to consume her every waking moment. At first, I thought it was just a phase she was going through. Maybe it was some kind of quarter-life crisis or just the stress of turning another year older. I figured she'd work through whatever was bothering her and things would get back to normal. I was completely wrong about that too. She started saying things that should have been major red flags, but at the time, I didn't fully grasp what they meant. Phrases like, I don't even recognize myself anymore, and I gave my best years to routine, became regular parts of our conversations. She'd stare off into the distance with this look of profound dissatisfaction, like she was trapped in a life that no longer fit her. Then, one Tuesday morning, she made a decision that blindsided me completely. She quit her teaching job without giving 2 weeks' notice, and without having any kind of backup plan in place. She just walked into the school that morning and told them, I can't teach anymore. I need to find meaning. Just like that, she walked away from a stable career and steady income because she felt called to discover some deeper purpose in life. The meaning she was searching for apparently came in the form of an online course. She found some program run by a woman named Serena, and she was willing to pay once hour $400 for what was described as a self-paced digital wellness certification. Being the practical person I am, I decided to do some research on this Serena character who was about to receive a significant chunk of our money. What I discovered was deeply concerning. Serena described herself as a high priestess of emotional sovereignty and had built up a substantial TikTok following along with her own merchandise line. Every single thing about her screamed red flags to me, but when I brought up my concerns to Victoria, she immediately accused me of being stuck in a scarcity mindset. That became the new pattern in our relationship. She'd throw around buzzwords and spiritual sound bites whenever I tried to have a practical conversation about our finances or our future. We started fighting constantly, though it wasn't the kind of yelling and screaming you might expect. Instead, it was this ongoing, persistent friction that seemed to underlie every interaction we had. I'd ask simple questions like how much money she'd spent that week, and she'd immediately throw it back at me with accusations that I was being controlling. When I'd ask what her end goal was with all these courses and certifications, she'd respond with vague statements about building a brand. A brand. That's what our marriage had been reduced to in her mind. She was building a personal brand while I watched our $15,000 in savings disappear at an alarming rate. She'd justify every purchase by telling me that I was addicted to stability, as if having financial security was some kind of character flaw. Meanwhile, the money kept flowing out of our accounts. And I didn't even realize how severe the damage was until I finally pulled the financial records later and saw the full scope of what had been happening. And then there was Bridget. Bridget had been in Victoria's life forever, but lately she was around constantly, almost like she had moved in with us. If I had to describe her, I'd say imagine if Gwyneth Paltrow and Alex Jones had a podcast baby together. She was always barefoot, always vaping something herbal that filled our house with strange smells, and she hyped Victoria up like she was witnessing the second coming of divine femininity. Bridget actively encouraged Victoria to abandon everything, her job, her previous life, and apparently me as well. She'd sit in our living room for hours, filling Victoria's head with ideas about breaking free from societal expectations and embracing her authentic self. That's when I started to realize that something much bigger was happening here than just a midlife crisis. Victoria began asking these weird, loaded questions during dinner that felt like tests I was destined to fail. She'd look at me across the table and ask things like, "Do you think we settled too young?" Or, "What if I left for a while to find myself?" The worst one was when she asked, "If we weren't married, would you still choose me now?" It felt like she wanted me to beg her to stay, to fight for our relationship and prove my devotion. But I didn't play that game. I simply told her the truth. I'd still choose you, but you don't sound like someone who wants to be chosen. She didn't have an answer for that. She just looked past me like I was part of the drywall, like I had become invisible furniture in my own home. That weekend, she informed me that she and Bridget were planning a trip to Nevada for a 2-week healing retreat. The itinerary included breathwork, sound baths, intention journaling, the whole spiritual wellness package that had become her obsession. What really got to me was when she told me not to contact her during the trip. She claimed she needed to release attachment, and that any text from me would disturb the vibration of her healing process. I looked at her and simply said, "All right, have a good trip." I wasn't going to argue or try to talk her out of it. If she needed to go find herself in the Nevada desert, that was her choice to make. The second her car pulled out of the driveway, I was already walking into the garage. I wasn't breaking down or having an emotional collapse. I was planning. This felt like the beginning of something much more serious than a spiritual retreat, and I needed to be prepared for whatever was coming next. It took me a couple of days to decide on getting legal help. At first, I wasn't entirely sure if I was overthinking the situation or if my instincts were actually right about where this was all heading. But then I remembered a buddy of mine who had been through something similar, and that conversation changed everything. I called Dave, who had gotten completely railroaded during his divorce about 3 years ago. His ex-wife had pretended to be sweet and understanding throughout the entire process, right up until she systematically cleaned him out. She managed to take half of his pension, sold his boat without his permission, and even tried to poison his relationship with his own daughter by filling the kid's head with lies about him. When I asked Dave who his lawyer had been, he immediately said, "Harrison. That guy is a stone-cold killer in a suit. Don't ask him about his weekend plans or try to make small talk. Just pay him and follow his orders exactly." That endorsement was enough for me to know I was heading in the right direction. I called Harrison's office the very next morning and paid cash for a consultation. 3 days later, I was sitting in his office, which looked like a file cabinet had exploded. There wasn't a single personal picture on the walls, no decorative touches, just stacks of legal documents and case files everywhere. Harrison didn't even pretend to smile or make pleasantries. He just sat me down and said, "Start talking." So I laid out the entire situation for him. I told him about Victoria quitting her job without notice, about the spiritual delusions and the expensive courses, about the weird finding herself talk, and about her sudden decision to disappear to Nevada for 2 weeks while telling me not to contact her. Harrison listened to everything without interrupting, nodding occasionally but keeping his expression completely neutral. When I finished explaining the situation, Harrison nodded once and said, "You're not overreacting, you're smart. Most men wait until she drains the accounts and changes the locks on them. You're getting ahead of this early, and that's good." His directness was exactly what I needed to hear. Harrison then gave me 3 specific instructions that would become my roadmap for the weeks ahead. First, I needed to secure our finances immediately. This meant moving my direct deposit to a new account, opening a separate checking account that only I had access to, and cutting off her access to all of our shared financial accounts. Second, I needed to document absolutely everything. Every withdrawal she made, every Instagram post where she talked about rebirth or personal growth, every piece of evidence that showed she was treating our marriage like a prison she needed to escape from. Harrison emphasized that documentation would be crucial if this situation escalated to legal proceedings. Third, and most importantly, I needed to say nothing to Victoria about any of these preparations. I couldn't confront her, couldn't tip her off to what I was doing, and couldn't give her any warning that I was preparing for the worst-case scenario. I needed to let her make the next move while I quietly made mine. I followed Harrison's instructions like they were blueprints for a construction project. I methodically pulled old text messages between Victoria and me, took screenshots of her social media posts about her coaching brand ideas, and made absolutely sure that the house deed still only had my name on it. This last point turned out to be crucial for what was coming. Harrison explained the legal reality of our situation in terms that made perfect sense. Because I had bought the house before we got married and Victoria was never added to the title, it counted as separate property under Ohio law, which meant it was legally mine. The same principle applied to my truck. As long as Victoria had never contributed toward the mortgage payments or vehicle payments, she couldn't touch either of them in a divorce proceeding. Harrison also advised me to pull credit reports on both of us to check if Victoria had tried to open any new accounts or credit lines in my name. He'd seen too many cases where spouses would rack up debt or open financial accounts without their partner's knowledge, and he wanted to make sure I wasn't vulnerable to that kind of financial sabotage. That night, I couldn't sleep, but it wasn't because I was heartbroken or devastated. I was genuinely pissed off, but not for the reasons you might expect. I wasn't angry because Victoria wanted to leave me or because our marriage was falling apart. I was furious because I could see exactly what she was doing. She was setting me up to be the villain in her personal reinvention story. In her narrative, I was going to be the controlling, emotionally distant husband who held her back from discovering her true self. I wasn't about to play that part in her drama. I had worked too hard and built too much to let someone else write the ending to my story. So when Victoria finally came back from her Nevada retreat and walked into our house like nothing significant had happened, I didn't flinch or react emotionally. She kissed my cheek in that casual, perfunctory way married couples do, then went straight to the bedroom to grab her laptop. She told me she needed to check in with her coaching clients. Apparently, she had already started building her new career while she was supposed to be finding herself in the desert. I just nodded and kept watching the game on television. I wasn't going to give her the reaction she was probably expecting or hoping for. The next morning, her text message arrived, and it was exactly what I had been preparing for. "Hey, I'm going to stay at Bridget's for a few more days. I need space, please don't make this harder than it has to be." I read the message twice, then set my phone down without responding. She had no idea that she had just given me everything I needed. While Victoria thought she was buying herself time to figure out her next move, she was actually providing me with documented evidence that she was voluntarily leaving our marital home. That text message would become a crucial piece of evidence in the legal proceedings that were about to begin. She had no idea what I was really doing while she was off in the desert, meditating in a yurt with her third eye sisters, as she liked to call them. While Victoria was chasing cosmic clarity and attending sound bath sessions, I was on the phone with my credit union, methodically closing her access to our joint account before she could clean it out completely. I kept everything quiet and avoided making any dramatic moves that might tip her off to what was happening. There were no heated confrontations or emotional outbursts, just strategic, calculated decisions. If this whole situation was like a chess game, she had made her opening move with glitter and inspirational hashtags about personal transformation. I was responding with bank statements and property law documentation. By the time Victoria sent me that text message about staying at Bridget's place, every piece of my defensive strategy was already in motion. I knew with absolute certainty that something bigger was coming down the pipeline. She didn't really want space to think things through. She was soft-launching her divorce, testing the waters to see how I would react. The real blow landed the very next day, and it came exactly as I had predicted. It wasn't delivered through a face-to-face conversation or even a phone call. Instead, I received a text message that read like a business transaction. "Marcus, I've decided to move forward with the divorce. All communication should go through my attorney. His contact information is below. No phone call to discuss our 7 years together. No meeting to try to work things out or see if we could salvage what we had built. Just a signature swap that felt like I was being kicked off a phone plan rather than ending a marriage." The coldness and impersonal nature of it actually made my response easier. I didn't respond to her text message at all. Instead, I immediately forwarded it directly to Harrison. I wasn't trying to be cold or vindictive. I just didn't see the point in trying to have a meaningful conversation with someone who had emotionally moved out of our marriage 3 months earlier. Harrison's response came back in under 6 minutes, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. "Let's go." We didn't just prepare for what was coming. We activated every strategy we had discussed. Harrison immediately submitted a notice of separate counsel, formally acknowledged Victoria's divorce petition, and filed a counterclaim of our own. Our evidence folder was already growing thick with documentation, and we were ready to present a comprehensive case that would protect my interests and expose the truth about what had really been happening in our marriage. Let me give you a breakdown for the guys reading this who might someday find themselves in this particular kind of hell. When divorce proceedings begin, the state examines three critical factors: who contributed what to the marriage, which assets were joint property versus individual property, and the timeline of events leading up to the divorce. The order and documentation of those three elements ultimately determines who walks away with what when everything is finalized. In our case, the facts were crystal clear. Victoria had quit her job while I kept working and maintaining our household income. She had voluntarily left our home while I stayed and continued paying the mortgage. Those weren't just personal choices or relationship decisions. They were legal markers that would have significant weight in court proceedings. I want to be completely transparent for anyone who doesn't understand how this works. Ohio law considers marital abandonment as a major factor when determining things like spousal support and asset division. And what exactly had Victoria done? She had left our marriage voluntarily, communicated that decision through a text message, and explicitly told me not to contact her during her absence. From a legal standpoint, that was pure gold. That documented evidence proved beyond any doubt that she was the party who had chosen to end our marital relationship. It wasn't a mutual decision or a situation where I had driven her away. She had made a unilateral choice to abandon our marriage and had put that choice in writing. Harrison had me collect absolutely everything that could support our case. We gathered pay stubs showing my consistent employment while she remained unemployed by choice. We collected house payment records proving my sole financial responsibility for our home. We pulled credit card statements from the previous 7 months that showed her spending patterns on spiritual courses and wellness retreats. We also collected her text messages and social media posts, including Instagram stories from her time in Nevada. One post that became particularly valuable to our case was a story she had shared that said, "Sometimes walking away is the most empowered thing you can do." Harrison immediately labeled that as documented evidence of voluntary exit from marital obligations. Following Harrison's advice, I also changed the locks on our house. This wasn't because I wanted to lock Victoria out or prevent her from accessing her belongings. The legal reality was that she no longer had residency at our address. That text message where she informed me she was staying with Bridget meant that she had relocated her primary residence. She had voluntarily given up occupancy of our marital home, and changing the locks was simply acknowledging that legal reality. Her lawyer could argue whatever emotional narrative they wanted to present, but the documented facts showed that Victoria had legally abandoned our shared residence and had communicated that abandonment in writing. That week, I started the process of boxing up Victoria's belongings. I want to be clear that I wasn't dumping her stuff or doing anything vindictive. I was organizing everything in a systematic, professional manner. Harrison had emphasized the importance of being surgical in my approach, avoiding any emotional triggers or actions that could be misconstrued as tampering with her property. I carefully labeled every box and kept detailed receipts of everything I packed. I hired professional movers and paid them in cash to ensure there would be a clear paper trail. They delivered every single labeled box directly to Bridget's apartment, where Victoria was now living. I made sure to include all of her personal belongings: her journals, her collection of sage bundles, her ring light for filming, and even that cheap tripod she used to record her spiritual rants. The only items I didn't include in the delivery were her prescription medications and personal legal documents. I kept those in a separate, clearly labeled envelope that remained logged and completely untouched in my possession. I wanted to ensure that if she needed access to important documents or medications, there would be no question about their availability or condition. After the delivery was complete, Bridget started sending me a barrage of text messages and voice notes. She was essentially acting like Victoria's public relations agent, trying to guilt me into changing my approach to the divorce. Her messages included gems like, "She gave you the best years of her life," and "She's scared and broke and you're throwing her away," and my personal favorite, "You're emotionally abusive and controlling." I took screenshots of every single word Bridget sent me and forwarded them directly to Harrison. His response was immediate and decisive. "We're moving to a cease and desist order. Let her lawyer chew on this." Harrison wasn't just protecting me from harassment. He was building a case that showed a pattern of third-party interference in our divorce proceedings. Meanwhile, I had started noticing something that didn't add up with our financial records. I had been under the impression that we still had approximately $15,000 in our savings account, but when I pulled the most recent statements, I discovered that only $4,200 remained. This was a much larger discrepancy than I had realized, and I needed to understand exactly where that money had gone. I pulled 7 months' worth of detailed financial statements and began going through every transaction. What I found was shocking. Victoria had spent $1,900 on various retreats and spiritual seminars. She had dropped $100 on crystals and candles from websites I had never even heard of. The mere $400 for her wellness certification was just the tip of the iceberg. There was an additional $2,700 in miscellaneous transactions labeled under vague categories like coaching tools, Reiki kits, and something called a yoni steam throne. That was the moment I realized I was no longer dealing with someone who had simply lost her way or was going through a spiritual phase. The financial evidence showed a pattern of deception and financial irresponsibility that had been hidden from me for months. I was done trying to be understanding or patient about Victoria's journey of self-discovery. Harrison immediately filed for a full forensic audit of Victoria's digital payment activities. We requested complete records from Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, and even cryptocurrency transfers if they existed. Legally, Victoria was required to disclose all financial activities that had occurred during our marriage. If she failed to provide complete records, that would constitute perjury. If she had lied about any transactions, that would be fraud. 3 days later, we received the partial records from her digital payment accounts, and one name kept appearing throughout the transaction history like a persistent stain. Adrian R. was showing up regularly in her payment records, and the frequency was deeply concerning. Every Thursday night, there would be a payment to Victoria ranging from $120 to $175, sometimes as much as $200. The captions attached to these payments were vague but telling. Session 3. Serena Inner Clarity and Clearing Trauma Field. As I reviewed the pattern of payments, it became increasingly obvious that this wasn't legitimate coaching or spiritual guidance. This was something else entirely. It looked like a side hustle with benefits. And Adrian R. appeared to be Victoria's primary customer. Harrison looked at the evidence and grinned with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had just found the smoking gun. "Congratulations," he said. "You've just discovered income infidelity and concealed assets." Victoria wanted empowerment and personal transformation. Now she's going to get accountability and legal consequences. We immediately added this new information to our counterclaim and labeled the money as marital property. Since these payments had been received during our marriage and had been concealed from me, they legally belonged to both of us. Harrison then sent Victoria's lawyer a formal notice of violation for false disclosure in her initial financial statements. Based on this evidence of concealed income, Harrison proposed that we file a motion to deny any spousal support. Victoria had been claiming financial hardship while secretly receiving regular payments that she had failed to report. This wasn't just poor financial planning, it was deliberate deception. A few days after we filed these new documents, the circus decided to come directly to my front lawn. Bridget didn't come alone this time. She brought Victoria with her, along with backup reinforcements. Victoria's brother Derek had joined them, as well as their Aunt Madison, who ran some kind of blog and had once tried to sue a supermarket for displaying what she called toxic masculine beef advertisements. They rolled up to my house in Bridget's Prius like they were leading some kind of resistance movement. Bridget was wearing her signature Birkenstocks and had an obvious spray tan. Madison was hiding behind oversized sunglasses, and Derek was flanked by what appeared to be a ballistic vest, like he was expecting an actual gunfight to break out on my front lawn. Bridget started filming with her iPhone before she had even gotten out of the car. I was watching the entire scene unfold through my Ring camera while sipping coffee in my kitchen. Through her phone, she announced to her audience, "Marcus, we are here to retrieve Victoria's belongings and document the emotional trauma you've inflicted." She was narrating the entire encounter like she was producing a documentary about domestic abuse, even though Victoria's belongings had already been professionally delivered to Bridget's apartment days earlier. Derek began banging on my front door like he was a police officer conducting a raid. I calmly tapped the Ring intercom system and delivered a clear warning. "You're trespassing on private property. This is your one and only warning to leave immediately." Bridget actually laughed when she heard my response through the intercom. She looked directly into her phone camera and said mockingly, "You think you can hide behind legal ease and intimidation tactics?" I replied through the intercom system, No, I don't hide behind anything. I stand behind a cease and desist order and a police report that's about to be filed. Leave my property now." Instead of taking the hint and departing, they decided to escalate the situation. Madison walked around to the side of my house and attempted to open my side gate without permission. This immediately triggered the security alarm that Harrison's security specialist had installed just the week before as an additional precaution. Derek started yelling directly at the Ring camera, his face red with anger. "This isn't over, Marcus. You don't get to silence a woman just because you're emotionally inferior and can't handle her growth." His threats were being recorded in high definition, which would prove useful later. Meanwhile, Bridget marched toward my driveway with her phone still recording, like she was building some kind of documentary case to present to the world. Victoria stood back with her arms crossed, playing the role of a martyr who was being persecuted for her spiritual beliefs. Derek continued pacing near the sidewalk, muttering angrily to himself about justice and accountability. That's when Bridget completely lost control of herself. She walked directly up to my F-250 truck, the one I've poured countless hours and significant money into maintaining, and started screaming at the Ring camera about patriarchal control mechanisms and how my truck represented everything wrong with toxic masculinity. Then she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a wrench. I watched in amazement as she swung it directly into the passenger side door of my truck. Once, then twice, leaving visible dents in the metal. On the third swing, she managed to crack the side mirror completely. I just let the camera continue recording everything. This was evidence that would speak for itself in court, and I didn't need to intervene or escalate the situation myself. Instead, I simply hit the silent panic button that Harrison had set me up with through his security contact. The group didn't last another 12 minutes before police squad cars arrived on the scene. The officers separated them quickly and professionally. Derek tried to claim that I had been provoking them psychically, which didn't exactly help his credibility with law enforcement. The officer looked directly at Bridget and stated matter-of-factly, "You struck a vehicle with a tool. That constitutes vandalism under state law." She was cited on the spot, and a formal report was filed. The Ring footage was downloaded onto a flash drive for evidence. I chose not to press additional charges that day, but Harrison advised me to hold on to all the documentation and video evidence. We would use it strategically when it would have the maximum legal impact, and that confrontation at my house was just the warm-up for what was coming next. Victoria's lawyer must have gotten wind of the new Ring camera footage and the police report, because the very next day he sent an incredibly condescending email to Harrison. The message read, "My client has expressed serious concerns over the hostile energy and inappropriate reactions from Mr. Marcus regarding mutual acquaintances attempting peaceful resolution of this matter." Harrison's response was beautifully concise. Just 2 words, "Prove it." That's when the gloves came completely off in this legal battle. Victoria filed an emergency motion for temporary spousal support, claiming that I had maliciously locked her out of our home, cut off her access to financial resources, and left her completely destitute and emotionally shattered. Her affidavit painted a picture of herself as a barefoot saint who had been emotionally manipulated, systematically silenced, and financially stripped after years of nurturing our home and relationship. According to Victoria's version of events, she was the victim of psychological abuse who had been left with no resources or support system after dedicating her best years to our marriage. Harrison filed our response the same day Victoria's motion was submitted. Our reply included the Ring camera footage showing Bridget's vandalism and Derek's threats, bank statements clearly documenting that Victoria had drained our savings account, delivery logs proving that I had professionally sent all of her belongings with complete documentation, and most importantly, Victoria's own Instagram captions about leaving to start a new life, free of dead weight. But what really made jaws drop in the legal proceedings were Bridget's TikTok videos. She had posted 2 particularly damaging videos during this period. The first was a rant about burning it all down and taking back the narrative, and the second included footage of Victoria relaxing at a spa during what was supposed to be her traumatic recovery week. Harrison had discovered all of this social media content and entered it into the official court record. In his response, he wrote, "If the petitioner is truly destitute and emotionally traumatized as claimed, she must explain the spa treatments, the security detail that accompanied her to the respondent's home, and the coordinated media campaign being conducted on her behalf." The judge reviewed all of the submitted evidence and denied Victoria's emergency motion without even scheduling a hearing. More significantly, the judge labeled Victoria's affidavit as factually inconsistent with submitted evidence, which was essentially a judicial way of saying she had been caught lying under oath. Victoria became noticeably quiet after that legal defeat, but her brother Derek was far from finished with his campaign against me. The next day, he decided to escalate things by showing up at my workplace during business hours. He told our receptionist that he was there to settle this man-to-man, which immediately put my entire crew on high alert. One of my crew guys, Daryl, who has been working with me since we were teenagers, immediately stepped in to handle the situation. Daryl looked Derek straight in the eye and said firmly, "Unless you're here to wire electrical circuits or answer legal subpoenas, you need to walk off this property right now." Derek didn't back down or show any signs of leaving. Instead, he stepped forward like he owned the place, puffing out his chest and locking his jaw in an aggressive stance. "You think hiding behind your little worker bees and fancy lawyers makes you a real man?" He barked at me, clearly trying to provoke a physical confrontation. Daryl positioned himself directly between Derek and me, maintaining his composure but making it clear he wasn't going to tolerate any escalation. "You need to step back immediately," Daryl warned him. Derek completely ignored Daryl's warning and continued his rant. "You emotionally broke my sister, Marcus. You humiliated her. You ruined her life. And now you think a bunch of paperwork and legal documents makes everything right?" I walked over slowly, still wearing my hard hat, and delivered a calm but clear ultimatum. "Get off my job site, Derek, before I make the phone call that ends this conversation permanently." Derek laughed, but there was nothing humorous about the sound. "You can't intimidate me, Marcus. I've taken down worse men than you. Victoria should have never married someone like you in the first place." By this point, 3 of my crew members had formed a protective circle around the confrontation. Derek made the critical mistake of pushing Daryl, which was exactly the wrong move to make. Daryl didn't retaliate or escalate the physical contact, but he immediately waved over to our on-site trailer where our security guy Lewis was already on his phone. I looked directly at Derek and said, "If you want to be a hero, go apply to Comic-Con. This is a construction job site, not a place for your personal drama." Security personnel arrived within minutes, 2 professional guys who were firm and efficient in their approach. Derek tried to argue with them, launching into a speech about his constitutional rights and his duty to protect his family from emotional abuse. None of his arguments mattered to the security team. They grabbed Derek by both arms and physically dragged him off the property. He was kicking and screaming the entire time, threatening lawsuits and yelling back at me, "This isn't over, Marcus. You're going to pay for what you did to her." I just nodded calmly and replied, "Tell your sister to put any further complaints in writing through her attorney." Derek finally backed down after that display, but the tension between our families had reached a dangerous red zone. That night, I received an anonymous tip from someone I had gone to high school with who now works in the city planning department. He informed me that someone had filed a formal complaint against my house for what they described as light pollution triggering emotional regressions in sensitive individuals. The complaint claimed that my motion sensor floodlights were disrupting the healing aura of the neighborhood and had allegedly caused someone's dog to become existentially anxious. I had to read the official form twice because I couldn't believe someone had actually submitted this nonsense to a government office. There was even a handwritten note attached to the complaint that read, "Reconsider your energy footprint before karma balances the ledger." This had Bridget's fingerprints all over it. Harrison submitted an injunction for harassment based on the light pollution complaint, though it didn't go anywhere from a legal standpoint. However, Harrison carefully logged it as part of the growing pattern of harassment that we were documenting. It was one more absurd attempt to provoke some kind of response from me, and it showed that Victoria was now connected to 3 different parties who were actively attempting to disrupt both my personal life and my professional work. And then the audit results came back, and they were far more damaging than I had initially expected. Trevor, who was Harrison's technology specialist, managed to obtain complete logs from Victoria's Venmo and PayPal accounts. What we discovered was that Adrian R. wasn't just a one-time payment. He was operating on a regular schedule with Victoria. The payments were coming in weekly, sometimes multiple times per week, with transaction captions that became increasingly inappropriate as I read through them. Messages like "post-session gratitude," "Serena Tantra prep," and "see you Friday" painted a clear picture of what was really happening. One transaction even included a direct message that read, "Thanks for last night, felt so good." Harrison immediately labeled this evidence as proof of a monetized emotional and sexual relationship that had been ongoing during our marriage. We amended our counterclaim to include charges of infidelity, concealed income, and waste of marital assets. But we weren't finished digging into Victoria's financial activities. I asked Trevor to expand his investigation and check for any other suspicious financial activity that we might have missed. 3 days later, I received a phone call that I'll never forget. Trevor's voice sounded genuinely rattled when he said, "Marcus, you need to sit down for this conversation, buddy." Trevor wasn't the type of person to sound shaken or disturbed by what he found in financial records, so when he told me to sit down, I knew I was about to hear something nuclear. "I found another payment processor tied to Victoria's activities," he continued. "It's connected to an alias Gmail account, but the recovery phone number matches Victoria's old fitness tracker subscription, and it's linked to an OnlyFans profile." He kept talking, and each detail was worse than the last. "She's been running this account for months, Marcus, and this isn't just wellness content or spiritual guidance either. It's branded under some new age name with a bio that says, 'Reclaiming Divine Feminine Energy Through Exclusive Self-Expression.' It includes guided rituals, sensual movement clips, and live sessions. But some of these pay-per-view captions go way beyond anything that could be considered PG rated." Trevor wasn't joking around or exaggerating the situation. He forwarded me screenshots that left no room for doubt. Victoria's face wasn't hidden or obscured in any way. Her wedding ring was clearly visible in several of the images. And there was Adrian R. again, showing up as her top subscriber and biggest financial supporter. This guy was tipping Victoria hundreds of dollars at a time and sending her messages like, "Loved the private session. Hope your truck gets fixed soon. You're too powerful for a man like him," and "Keep rising. I'd protect you forever." Trevor pulled comprehensive transaction logs, payout summaries, and IP address matches. It was like conducting a digital autopsy of Victoria's secret financial life. She had been running an OnlyFans account for months, systematically raking in unreported cash while simultaneously crying poor in court documents. And Adrian wasn't just some random subscriber. He was her top tipper, her side hustle coordinator, and apparently her new version of sacred masculinity. Harrison's voice turned to cold fury when I called and told him about Trevor's discoveries. "That's not just concealed income," he said. "That's monetized infidelity during the marriage. And if any of that money went toward fixing the truck that Bridget vandalized, that constitutes marital asset laundering." We didn't hesitate or delay our response. Harrison immediately filed a supplemental affidavit with the court, labeling the evidence packet as Exhibit G. The documentation included payout records, login history, message logs between Victoria and Adrian, and one particularly damaging screenshot of Adrian telling her, "This should cover your car problem, babe." We were now able to show the court that Victoria hadn't just lied about being financially destitute. She had been making thousands of dollars while claiming poverty in her legal filings. More importantly, she had been using that unreported income to clean up the property damage that her friend Bridget had caused to my truck. But the OnlyFans discovery wasn't the worst part of what we uncovered. Harrison added several new charges to our legal claim: waste of marital assets, perjury for lying under oath about her financial situation, and fraudulent concealment of income. We also filed a motion requesting financial sanctions against Victoria for her false disclosures. Additionally, Harrison submitted an anonymous report to the IRS regarding Victoria's unreported income from her OnlyFans activities. If Victoria failed to amend her financial disclosure before our scheduled hearing, she would be facing potential tax evasion charges on top of the civil penalties we were pursuing. Victoria's lawyer responded to our new evidence with a laughably vague email that attempted to minimize the situation. He wrote, "There appears to be some misunderstanding regarding these matters. Ms. Victoria has been exploring alternative business models during a time of significant emotional upheaval. She wasn't aware that these activities required immediate financial reporting to the court." Harrison's reply was devastatingly direct. Just one line. She monetized nudity and used those proceeds to fund property restoration while lying under oath. There's no misunderstanding here, just documented evidence. Meanwhile, Bridget was desperately trying to save face and control the narrative by going on Instagram Live. During her broadcast, she called me a misogynist who was trying to financially bankrupt an innocent woman for the crime of surviving an abusive marriage. She claimed that I had weaponized the legal system specifically to destroy a creative healer who was just trying to rebuild her life. Then Bridget launched a GoFundMe campaign for Victoria titled "Rise from the Rubble." The fundraising effort managed to raise exactly $97 before someone flagged it for fraudulent representation. But even better for our legal case, Bridget accidentally posted a screenshot of a private text conversation with Victoria where she had written, "Don't tell your lawyer about the cash payments from Adrian. Keep that separate. He was donating to support your spiritual journey, not funding a business." We immediately pulled that screenshot and preserved it as evidence. Harrison looked at it and grinned with satisfaction, saying, "That's enough to put the final nail in the coffin." We were now armed with an overwhelming amount of documented evidence. We had Venmo transaction logs from Adrian showing recurring payments for sessions that predated the divorce proceedings. We had Victoria's OnlyFans income records with tied payout history and subscriber direct messages that proved ongoing financial and sexual relationships during our marriage. We had a notarized affidavit from Trevor authenticating all of the digital records, ensuring there would be no wiggle room regarding admissibility in court. We also had ring camera footage of Bridget vandalizing my truck with a wrench, along with a civil judgment against her for property damage, proving third-party interference with marital assets. We had collected public social media posts where both Victoria and Bridget were actively smearing my reputation in live streams, attempting to paint me as an abusive husband. Most importantly, we now had screenshots of Bridget coaching Victoria to lie to her attorney and hide cash payments from Adrian. Trevor had submitted a notarized affidavit authenticating all of the digital records, so there would be absolutely no legal wiggle room on their admissibility as evidence. This was turning into a legal cage match, and we were in complete control of the mat, the lighting, and the referee. But what made this situation even sweeter was discovering that Victoria had been using my name, my full legal name, as a testimonial on her website for something called Sacred Femme Revive. According to her website, I supposedly supported her spiritual journey and endorsed the value of feminine reintegration. She was claiming that I had given my blessing to her transformation and was encouraging other women to follow her example. This was completely fabricated, and she was using my reputation to solicit paying clients for her coaching business. That unauthorized use of my identity was the final straw. Harrison immediately filed a cease and desist order for impersonation and unauthorized testimonial use. We added this violation to our motion for civil damages, and because Victoria had used that false testimonial to solicit paying clients from women seeking spiritual guidance, it qualified as fraudulent representation under state law. I wasn't just dealing with a wife who had become a stranger. I was dealing with someone who had evolved into a full-scale con artist willing to use my name and reputation to build her fraudulent business. And then came the final twist in this increasingly complex legal saga. Trevor's last investigative report revealed something that took this case to an entirely new level. It turned out that Victoria had applied for a business loan using our marital address as her primary residence. She had used our shared address on the loan application and claimed she was starting a women's retreat studio focused on spiritual healing. She had filed this loan application 3 weeks before her supposed soul-searching trip to Nevada. The most shocking part was discovering who had co-signed the loan application: Bridget. And who had lied on the application about shared assets and household income? Victoria. They never actually received the funds because the application got flagged by the bank due to mismatched tax identification entries and inconsistent information. However, Harrison managed to obtain a copy of the submitted loan application, and he immediately filed it under attempted financial fraud and identity misuse. We were no longer simply negotiating the terms of a divorce settlement. At this point, we were preparing to sue Victoria for substantial damages based on her pattern of fraudulent behavior. While the state hadn't filed any criminal charges against her, Harrison was focused on locking down our civil claims for financial fraud, false endorsement, and systematic concealment of income. We had accumulated enough evidence to bury her in legal penalties and financial consequences. As for Derek, he wasn't finished with his campaign of harassment and intimidation. He came back to my house, and this time, it wasn't just another unhinged performance or angry confrontation. It was 10:30 in the evening when I noticed his car parked directly across the street from my house. His lights were turned off and his windows were rolled up, but I could see him sitting inside the vehicle. I watched through my window blinds as Derek stepped out of his car and began pacing slowly on the sidewalk, like he was working up the courage to do something more serious than just yelling threats. Then he crossed the street and positioned himself at the edge of my driveway, staring directly at my house with an intensity that felt genuinely threatening. I opened my front door just enough to be clearly visible to him. Derek pointed straight at me and said in a low, steady voice, "You think this is over, Marcus? You think you can humiliate her, Drag her through court proceedings, ruin her entire life, and just walk away like nothing happened? I didn't respond to his provocation. I just kept my hand positioned on the door frame, ready to close and lock it if necessary. His tone was different this time. Not loud or explosive, but low and controlled, like someone who had already made a decision about what he was going to do next. "You're a threat to women like Victoria," he continued with his disturbing monologue. "People like you don't change on their own. Maybe someone needs to change it for you." That's when I immediately shut the door and called the police. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This felt like a genuine threat of violence. Derek didn't leave after I closed the door. Instead, he walked right up to my porch and stood there, close enough to trigger the Ring camera's motion sensors. I could hear him through the audio system muttering something about retribution and karma, balancing the scales of justice. When the police officers arrived on the scene, Derek became agitated very quickly. He told them that he was protecting his innocent sister from an abusive husband and that I represented a danger to the entire community. Then he made the critical mistake of reaching into his jacket while simultaneously yelling at one of the responding officers. The police pinned Derek to the hood of his own car within seconds. He was cited for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and resisting police instructions. The body camera footage captured the entire encounter, especially the part where Derek shouted at the officers, "If the law won't stop him, someone else will." Harrison filed the police report into our legal motion the very next morning. The judge didn't hesitate for even a moment before extending the restraining order to cover all of Victoria's direct family members and known associates. Derek's threatening behavior had just legally isolated Victoria from her primary support system. And just like that, the final pre-trial conference date was officially set. We were heading toward the conclusion of this legal battle, and we were prepared for whatever Victoria's legal team might try to present as their defense. The courthouse wasn't a glamorous or impressive building. It was just a functional government facility where justice was supposed to be administered. I wore my work boots to the hearing because Harrison had advised me to look clean and professional, but not soft or apologetic. "You're here to win this case," he told me, "not to make friends or gain sympathy." Victoria walked into the courtroom exactly 6 minutes before the proceedings were scheduled to begin. She came alone this time. No Bridget for moral support, no Madison with her oversized sunglasses, just Victoria and her lawyer Jennings. Jennings was a man who looked like a crumpled tax form that had somehow gained a pulse and learned to walk upright. Victoria didn't look at me during the entire time we were in the same room. She didn't even glance in my direction, which was probably a strategic decision made by her legal counsel. Harrison leaned over and whispered to me, "This isn't going to take very long." The judge entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who had seen every possible variation of human drama. He was an older gentleman with a military background and absolutely no patience for emotional theatrics or legal fluff. He skimmed through the case docket and then raised an eyebrow at the sheer volume of motions and supplemental filings that had been submitted. "Mr. Harrison," the judge said, "you've submitted 6 different supplemental claims since the initial divorce filing was entered." Harrison smiled with professional confidence and replied, "All documented, Your Honor. Every single development has been backed by time-stamped evidence and verified through multiple sources." Harrison stood to address the court. "Your Honor, we've named a non-party associate, Bridget Miller, in several of our filings. She's been issued a restraining order for property destruction and criminal trespass. We've also entered a civil judgment for damages she caused to the respondent's vehicle during the marriage. Additionally, her text messages show coordinated intent to conceal financial transactions on behalf of the petitioner. We consider her a co-conspirator in fraudulent asset concealment." The judge flipped to the section of our filing that dealt with Bridget's involvement. He read through the screenshots and documentation, then looked directly at Victoria. "You surrounded yourself with people who didn't just enable your questionable behavior. They escalated it into criminal territory. That's legally relevant, and we'll proceed with that context in mind." Jennings opened his defense weakly, claiming that Victoria had been left financially stranded by my actions, that she was navigating major life transitions, and that my allegedly controlling behavior had left her psychologically disoriented and unable to make sound decisions. He tried to humanize Victoria and present her as a victim of circumstance. The judge stopped Jennings mid-sentence and asked pointedly, "Is there any documented evidence of abuse or misconduct by the respondent?" Jennings stammered, "Not in traditional forms, but the emotional manipulation and financial control." "Then let's move to the financial evidence," the judge interrupted. Harrison stood and delivered what felt like a legal knockout punch. "Your Honor, Exhibit G includes comprehensive OnlyFans earnings records, Venmo payments from a man who was romantically involved with the petitioner during the marriage, and video footage of property damage committed by the petitioner's close associate. All of this occurred while the petitioner was still legally married. She also used my client's legal name without consent to solicit funds from vulnerable women seeking spiritual guidance. We consider this a pattern of concealment, infidelity, fraud, and reputational harm. Harrison handed over our thick evidence packet to the judge, who began flipping through it silently, stopping occasionally at particularly damaging pieces of evidence, including the message from Adrian that read, "Use this for your car fix, babe. Mrs. Victoria," the judge said, his eyes fixed on the page containing Adrian's incriminating message. "Is this your account?" Jennings tried to intercept the question before Victoria could answer. "Your Honor," she was unaware of the legal implications of monetized self-expression. This was a coping mechanism during emotional trauma, not a business venture. Harrison didn't flinch or show any reaction to this pathetic defense. She claimed to be unemployed and financially destitute in her court filings. Yet we have documented financial transactions, subscription revenue, and advertising income directly linked to those activities. She deliberately lied on her financial disclosure forms. The judge nodded with a stone-faced expression and continued reviewing our evidence. And what about the vandalism claim? Harrison passed over the ring camera video footage to the court. Bridget Miller, the petitioner's close associate, struck the respondent's truck with a wrench while the petitioner was present and chose not to intervene. The petitioner then accepted financial assistance from Adrian R. to cover the repair costs. That payment came from the same account where her OnlyFans revenue was being deposited. Harrison then submitted the police report from the night Derek had shown up outside my house, making direct threats against me. He played the ring camera footage for the court and cited Derek's exact words. "If the law won't stop him, someone else will." The judge's facial expression didn't change by even a millimeter, but he reached for his pen and officially extended the restraining order to include Derek by name. The pattern of harassment and intimidation was now legally recognized and documented. Jennings muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite make out. "Speak up," the judge commanded. Victoria was emotionally vulnerable during this period. She wasn't thinking clearly about the consequences of her actions. The judge stared at Jennings for a full 6 seconds of uncomfortable silence. "That's not a legal defense, Mr. Jennings. That's an excuse. This court doesn't operate on emotional leniency or feelings. It operates on documented facts and evidence." We then moved to the property division portion of the hearing. My house had been purchased pre-marriage and was titled in my name only. There was no evidence of cohabitation contributions or shared equity investments. My truck was also mine, and my retirement accounts were mostly accumulated before the marriage. The judge recited the relevant property law like he had done it thousands of times in his sleep. The respondent retains ownership of all property classified as non-marital assets. No evidence has been provided indicating co-investment, shared equity, or marital contributions to these assets. Harrison stood one final time to deliver our closing argument. "We are also requesting financial sanctions against the petitioner for false disclosure under oath, and we're asking for denial of all spousal support due to proven marital misconduct and systematic concealment of material income." Jennings attempted one last desperate maneuver, claiming that Victoria's OnlyFans earnings were sporadic and didn't constitute meaningful income that would affect support calculations. Harrison immediately handed over a screenshot showing over $2,500 in deposits from her account. The judge looked directly at Jennings and asked, "Did the petitioner report this income on her tax returns?" Jennings didn't answer immediately. "Mr. Jennings?" the judge repeated. "No, Your Honor." The courtroom remained completely quiet. There were no murmurs from observers, no shuffling of papers, just the sound of Victoria fidgeting nervously in her chair as the weight of her lies became undeniable. The final ruling came down with the cold efficiency of a legal machine that had processed thousands of similar cases. The house would remain mine, as it was clearly non-marital property purchased before our wedding. The truck repairs caused by Bridget's vandalism would be fully reimbursed by Victoria within 50 days. Spousal support was completely denied due to proven infidelity, concealed income, and Victoria's ongoing coordination with third parties involved in property damage and systematic harassment. The judge ordered that Victoria's OnlyFans and Venmo income must be immediately disclosed to the IRS for proper tax reporting. The restraining order was now officially expanded to include Bridget by name. She had wanted to be part of Victoria's spiritual revolution, and the court had just made her part of the legal fallout and consequences. Jennings tried to argue one final time, attempting to minimize the significance of Victoria's financial deception. The judge raised his hand to silence him before he could finish his sentence. "I don't care what podcast your client listened to or what spiritual awakening she claims to have experienced," the judge said with finality. "She lied under oath. She hid substantial income from this court, and she brought this entire circus into my courtroom. We're done here." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the room. Victoria stood up slowly but didn't leave the courtroom immediately. For a brief moment, I thought she might finally say something to me. Maybe an apology for the chaos she had created, or perhaps one last attempt to justify her actions. But there was nothing. She simply turned around and walked out of the courtroom like the floor had dropped out from under her, leaving behind the wreckage of everything we had once built together. I stood up, shook Harrison's hand firmly, and nodded respectfully to the bailiff as I made my way out of the courthouse. It felt like walking away from a fire that I hadn't started, but had made absolutely certain that I finished properly. The day after the court proceedings concluded, I woke up to a kind of quiet that I hadn't experienced in months. This wasn't the anxious quiet that makes you constantly check your phone or look over your shoulder. This was the kind of peaceful silence that allows your shoulders to finally drop and your breathing to return to normal. My phone didn't light up with threatening messages or passive-aggressive quotes about healing and personal growth. There were no more TikTok videos, no Instagram stories filled with spiritual platitudes about rising above toxic masculinity. Just genuine peace and the absence of manufactured drama. I made my morning coffee, walked out to sit on my front porch, and watched the sun rise over my truck. The vehicle had been newly repaired and freshly detailed, looking like none of the vandalism had ever happened. But it had happened, and every scar left behind in this entire experience was mine to keep and learn from. The following week, Harrison filed the final paperwork to close our case. We declined any mediation or settlement discussions because there was simply nothing left to negotiate or divide. The legal judgment was final and comprehensive. Victoria walked away with nothing except her own financial and legal mess, plus a significant tax issue that she would be explaining to the IRS with shaky hands and whatever inspirational Pinterest quotes she could find about overcoming adversity. As for Bridget, her Etsy page mysteriously disappeared shortly after the court ruling. Word traveled fast through the spiritual wellness community, and a few content creators who had previously backed her sisterhood brand sent me screenshots of Bridget trash-talking Victoria behind her back. In these private messages, Bridget was saying things like, "She got in way too deep with all this legal stuff. I just wanted to be famous and build my following." The civil lawsuit for the truck damage moved forward separately from the divorce proceedings. Bridget's lawyer was a court-appointed public defender who looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the case. He offered a soft settlement that would have quietly resolved the matter without any public record. I declined the settlement offer. I didn't want hush money or a private resolution that would let Bridget escape the consequences of her actions. I wanted the legal judgment to be entered into the public record where it would stick like dried cement. Any future business partner, landlord, or brand collaboration that Bridget tried to pursue would discover this judgment during their background checks. The court ultimately awarded me $7,100 in damages, with the amount being garnished from any future income Bridget earned over $40,000 annually. The judgment was entered into the publicly searchable court records, creating a permanent legal scar on her financial reputation. This wasn't about revenge or getting even. This was about insurance. I wanted to ensure that any future victim of Bridget's schemes would have access to information about her history of property destruction and legal troubles. As for Derek, he was permanently banned from all of my job sites and was charged with misdemeanor assault and criminal trespass. As part of a deferred plea agreement, he was forced to write a public apology letter that was filed with the court. The last I heard, Derek was trying to get hired by a private security firm, but the background check requirement killed that opportunity immediately. Victoria, however, tried to contact me one more time about 4 weeks after the court decision was finalized. I received a letter in the mail, not an email or text message, but an actual handwritten 5-page letter written in loopy script on pastel-colored paper that looked like it came from a teenager's diary. She didn't ask for money in the letter, and surprisingly, she didn't ask for forgiveness either. Instead, Victoria tried to reframe our entire relationship and divorce as what she called a necessary spiritual fracture. She wrote that she still loved the part of me that had once believed in her potential for growth and transformation. Victoria's letter concluded with her hope that someday I would be able to remember her as a woman who had been in pain and searching for meaning, rather than as a monster who had destroyed our marriage through deception and betrayal. I read the entire letter twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into a manila folder along with all the other documentation from our divorce case. I locked the folder away in my home safe, not because I had any sentimental attachment to her words, but because I wanted to preserve evidence just in case Victoria ever decided to come back with another performance or legal challenge. The thing about people like Victoria is that they don't fundamentally change their character. They just rotate through different versions of the same script, always casting themselves as the misunderstood victim while everyone else plays the role of the oppressor who doesn't understand their higher purpose.